The town of Millbrook sat quietly between rolling hills, where everyone knew everyone else's business. It was the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked, and neighbors borrowed sugar from each other. But beneath this peaceful surface, there were invisible lines that nobody dared to cross. David had lived in Millbrook his entire life. At 28, he worked at the local hardware store and knew every family in town. He understood the unspoken rules that kept their small community running smoothly. Some families lived on the east side, others on the west. Some went to one church, others to another. Everyone had their place, and everyone stayed in it. That was until he met Amara. It happened on a Tuesday morning when she walked into his store looking for paint. David was stacking shelves when he heard the bell above the door chime. He turned around and saw a woman he had never seen before. She had warm brown eyes and a gentle smile that made him forget what he was doing. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I'm looking for white paint for my grandmother's fence." David set down the boxes he was holding and walked over to help her. As they talked about different types of paint, he learned that she had moved to town to take care of her elderly grandmother, who lived in a small house on Elm Street. She had just finished college and was planning to stay for a few months. "I've never seen you around before," David said, genuinely curious. "I grew up 3 towns over." Amara replied, "My grandmother needed help, so here I am." There was something about the way she spoke that drew him in. She was kind and thoughtful, asking questions about the best paint for old wood and whether she should primer first. Most customers just wanted to buy something and leave, but she seemed genuinely interested in doing things right. After she paid for the paint, David found himself hoping she would come back soon. He didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, she returned for brushes and drop cloths. Then she came back for wood stain each time. They talked a little longer. During their 4th visit, David offered to help her with the fence project after work. "I know all about old wood," he said with a smile. "Your grandmother's fence probably needs more than just paint." Amar hesitated for a moment, then agreed. That evening, David showed up at the small house on Elm Street with his toolbox. What was supposed to be a quick fence repair turned into 3 hours of work and conversation. They talked about books, dreams, and life in small towns. As the weeks passed, David found reasons to drive by Elm Street on his way to work. Sometimes he would see Amara in the garden with her grandmother, and he would wave. Other times, he would stop by the hardware store, hoping she might need something else. Their friendship grew naturally. They would meet for coffee at the town's only diner, always sitting in the back booth where they could talk without too many people noticing. David learned that Amara loved to read mystery novels and that she had studied art in college. She learned that David had taken over the hardware store from his father, and that he built furniture in his spare time. But even during these innocent meetings, David noticed things that made him uncomfortable. He saw how some people in the diner would look at them with curious eyes. He heard whispered conversations that stopped when he walked by. Mrs. Henderson from the post office asked him directly one day, "Who is that girl you've been seen with?" David tried to brush off these concerns. After all, they were just friends. There was nothing wrong with being kind to someone new in town. But deep down, he knew that their friendship was causing talk among certain families in Millbrook. The first real warning came from his own mother during Sunday dinner. "Son," she said carefully, "people are starting to notice you spending time with that girl from Elm Street. You know how folks talk in a small town. She's just a friend, Mom," David replied. "I was helping her fix her grandmother's fence." His mother looked at him with worried eyes. "I know you have a good heart, David, but some friendships can cause more trouble than they're worth. This town has its ways, and it's been peaceful for a long time." David understood what his mother was really saying. The east side and west side of town had lived separately for generations. It wasn't written down anywhere, but everyone knew the rules. Families from different sides might be polite at the grocery store or church, but they didn't socialize, they didn't become friends, and they certainly didn't date. Despite the growing whispers, David couldn't stay away from Amara. Their friendship had become the best part of his week. She made him laugh and think about things differently. When she talked about the places she had traveled and the art she had studied, he felt like his small world was expanding. One evening in late summer, as they sat on her grandmother's porch watching the sunset, Amara said something that changed everything. "David, I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "I know what people in this town are saying about us. My grandmother has heard the whispers too." David felt his stomach drop. He had hoped that maybe people would get used to seeing them together and the talk would die down. "What are they saying?" he asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. "They're saying we're more than friends," Amara replied. "And they're saying that's not acceptable here." David looked at her sitting there in the golden evening light, and he realized that what people were saying was true. Somewhere along the way, his feelings for Amara had grown into something much deeper than friendship. And from the way she was looking at him, he could tell she felt the same way. "Maybe what they're saying isn't entirely wrong," he said softly. Amara smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. "I was hoping you would say that," she whispered. "But I'm also scared of what it means." They both knew that their growing feelings for each other would not be welcomed in Millbrook. The invisible lines that divided their town were about to be tested in a way that hadn't happened in decades. What had started as a simple friendship over paint and fence repairs was about to challenge everything their community believed about keeping the peace. As David walked home that night, he felt both happier and more worried than he had ever been in his life. He loved Amara, and she loved him back. But in a town like Millbrook, love wasn't always enough to overcome the weight of tradition and fear. The summer was ending, and with it, the innocent days of their secret friendship. Soon, they would have to decide whether their love was worth the storm that was surely coming their way. The autumn leaves were just starting to turn when everything fell apart. David and Amara had been meeting in secret for 3 months, thinking they were being careful. They would take long walks on the old hiking trail behind the town, or sit by the creek that ran through the woods. These quiet moments felt like stolen treasures in a world that seemed determined to keep them apart. But in a town like Millbrook, secrets never stayed hidden for long. It was Mrs. Patterson who saw them first. She was picking blackberries near the creek when she spotted David and Amara sitting on a fallen log, holding hands and talking quietly. Mrs. Patterson had lived in Millbrook for 70 years and considered herself the town's unofficial watchkeeper. She hurried back to town with news that would spread like wildfire. By evening, half the town knew that David Miller and the girl from Elm Street had been seen together in what was clearly more than a friendship meeting. The phone lines buzzed with whispered conversations. People gathered in small groups at the grocery store and outside the church, shaking their heads and talking in hushed tones. David first learned about the discovery when his father stormed into the hardware store. The next morning, his face was red with anger and embarrassment. "Is it true?" his father demanded, not even bothering with a greeting. "Tell me Mrs. Patterson is making things up." David's heart sank. He had hoped for more time before this moment came. "Dad, I can explain. So it is true." His father slammed his hand on the counter. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you understand what this means for our family?" Before David could answer, his father continued. "The Hendersons called this morning. So did the Johnsons and the Webbers. Everyone wants to know how we raised a son who would bring shame on this community." David felt anger rising in his chest. "Shame? What shame? Dad, I care about someone. Since when is that shameful? Since you decided to ignore everything this town stands for." His father shot back. "We have rules here, David. Good rules that keep the peace. Your grandfather understood that. I understand that. Why can't you?" The argument continued for an hour, with customers coming and going while father and son faced off over everything their family had believed for generations. Finally, his father delivered an ultimatum that made David's blood run cold. "You will stop seeing her immediately," his father said. "You will apologize to the town council for your behavior, and you will find a nice girl from a proper family to court. If you don't, you can find somewhere else to work and somewhere else to live." Meanwhile, across town, Amara was facing her own family crisis. Her grandmother, who had been nothing but kind and supportive, sat at the kitchen table with tears in her eyes. "Child," her grandmother said softly, "I've lived in this town for 40 years. I know how things work here, and I know what happens to people who try to change them." Amara sat down across from her grandmother, feeling scared for the first time since moving to Millbrook. "What do you mean, Grandma? 20 years ago, there was another couple like you and David. They tried to be together despite what people said. It didn't end well for either of them." Her grandmother's voice shook as she spoke. "The boy lost his job and had to leave town. The girl, well, let's just say the community made sure she understood her place." The weight of her grandmother's words settled on Amara like a heavy blanket. "Are you telling me to stop seeing David?" Her grandmother reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm telling you to be very careful. People here don't like change, and they especially don't like it when young people challenge the way things have always been." That evening, David and Amara met at their usual spot by the creek, but this time, everything felt different. The magic of their secret meetings had been replaced by fear and uncertainty. "They all know," David said as soon as he saw her. "My father is furious. He's threatening to kick me out of the house and fire me from the store." Amara nodded sadly. "My grandmother is scared too. She told me about another couple who tried to be together years ago. It didn't go well for them." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the water flowing over the rocks. Both of them knew that their relationship had reached a turning point. They could end things now and try to go back to their separate lives, or they could fight for their love despite the consequences. "What do you want to do?" David asked finally. Amara looked at him with determination in her eyes. "I want to be with you, but I'm scared of what they'll do to us." "Me too," David admitted. "But I can't pretend I don't love you just because some people don't approve." Their decision to continue their relationship, despite the growing opposition, marked the beginning of a much darker chapter in their story. Within days, the pressure from the community intensified in ways neither of them had imagined. David's customers started taking their business to the hardware store in the next town. People who had been friendly to him his entire life now crossed the street to avoid talking to him. His own family stopped inviting him to Sunday dinners. Amara faced even worse treatment. Someone threw rocks at her grandmother's windows in the middle of the night. Nasty letters appeared in their mailbox when she went to the grocery store. Other customers would whisper and point, making her feel like an outsider in her own temporary home. The breaking point came during a town council meeting in late October. David's father, along with several other prominent families, called for a special session to discuss the problem that was disrupting community harmony. David and Amara weren't invited to speak at the meeting, but they sat in the back row and listened as people they had known all their lives talked about them like they were criminals. "This kind of behavior threatens everything we've worked to build here," said Mr. Henderson, the bank president. "If we allow it to continue, where will it end? What kind of example are we setting for our children?" Mrs. Patterson stood up and addressed the room with righteous anger. "I've seen them together multiple times, acting inappropriately in public. It's scandalous and disrespectful to our community values." One by one, community leaders spoke about the need to address the situation before it got out of hand. The message was clear. David and Amara's relationship was not just disapproved of. It was considered a threat to the town's way of life. As they walked home that night, both David and Amara realized that their quiet romance had become something much bigger and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The community that had raised David and welcomed Amara was now united against them. "They're not going to just ignore us until we go away," Amara said quietly. "They're planning something." David nodded, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "I know, but I'm not giving up on us, no matter what they do." Neither of them realized just how far the town would go to make their point. The worst was yet to come. Check Control Sonnet 4. November came to Millbrook with an unusual coldness. The first frost had killed the last of the flowers, and the bare trees stood like silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. David had been working extra hours at the hardware store, partly because business was slow after many customers stopped coming, and partly because staying busy helped him avoid thinking about the growing tension in town. The warning signs had been there for weeks. Groups of men would stop talking when David walked by. Women would gather in small circles outside the church, their voices low and serious. Even the teenagers seemed to know something was coming. The whole town felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Amara had become increasingly isolated. Her grandmother barely left the house anymore, too frightened by the anonymous letters and midnight disturbances. The grocery trips had become unbearable, with people openly staring and whispering. Some days, Amara would come home in tears, telling her grandmother about the cruel comments and cold shoulders she had received. Maybe we should leave, her grandmother suggested one evening as they sat by the fireplace. I have a sister in the next state. We could go stay with her until this all blows over. But Amara shook her head. I won't let them chase me away, Grandma. David and I haven't done anything wrong. We just fell in love. Her grandmother's eyes filled with worry. Sometimes being right isn't enough, child. Sometimes it's better to be safe. The breaking point came on a gray Thursday morning in mid-November. David was opening the hardware store when he saw a crowd gathering in the town square. At first, he thought it might be some kind of community event, but something about the mood felt different. The people weren't chatting and laughing like they would at a festival. They were serious, almost angry. David locked up the store and walked toward the square to see what was happening. As he got closer, his blood turned to ice. In the center of the crowd, they had erected a tall wooden pole, and tied to that pole, about 3 feet off the ground, was Amara. She was conscious but clearly terrified. Her hands were bound behind her back and rope was wrapped around her waist, holding her against the pole. A crude sign hung around her neck that read community shame in large, black letters. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she wasn't crying. Even in this horrible situation, she maintained her dignity. David started running toward her, but several men stepped in his path, blocking his way. He recognized them all: Mr. Henderson from the bank, Joe Williams who ran the auto shop, and Tom Brady who owned the largest farm outside town. This doesn't concern you anymore, David, Mr. Henderson said firmly. Your family has been informed. This is community business now. Community business? David shouted, trying to push past them. You've tied an innocent woman to a pole like some kind of criminal. This is insane. She made her choice, Joe Williams replied coldly. She chose to disrespect our community and our values. Now she faces the consequences. David looked around desperately at the faces in the crowd. Some people looked uncomfortable, but nobody was stepping forward to help. He saw Mrs. Patterson nodding approvingly. He saw his own neighbors standing silently, watching this horrible scene unfold. How long are you planning to keep her there? David demanded. Until she learns her lesson, Tom Brady answered. Until she understands that some lines shouldn't be crossed. Amara's voice, though weak, carried across the square. David, don't blame yourself for this. You couldn't have known they would go this far. Her words broke David's heart. Even while being publicly punished and humiliated, she was trying to comfort him. He had never loved her more, and he had never felt more helpless. The crowd began to disperse as the morning wore on, but several men remained to guard the pole and make sure nobody interfered. David was forced to stand at a distance, watching the woman he loved suffer for the crime of loving him back. As the hours passed, Amara grew weaker. The November cold was harsh, and being tied in one position was taking its toll on her body. David could see her shivering, and sometimes her head would drop forward as if she was losing consciousness. Please, David begged Mr. Henderson around noon. She's been there for hours. She's learned whatever lesson you wanted to teach. Let her down. The sun goes down at 6 o'clock, Mr. Henderson replied without emotion. She stays until then. That was the decision of the community leaders. David felt rage building inside him like nothing he had ever experienced. The community leaders? You mean the handful of bullies who think they own this town? Watch your tongue, boy, Tom Brady warned. You're already on thin ice with this community. Don't make things worse for yourself, worse for myself. David laughed bitterly. You've just tortured the woman I love in front of the whole town. How could things possibly get worse? By mid-afternoon, David couldn't take it anymore. He had spent the day pacing, pleading, and looking for any way to help Amara. But the men guarding her were determined to see their punishment through to the end. Amara's condition was getting worse by the hour. Her lips were blue from the cold, and she was barely able to keep her head up. The strong, vibrant woman who had captured David's heart was being slowly broken by his own community. "This is murder," David told Mr. Henderson desperately. "Look at her. She can't take much more of this. She should have thought of that before she decided to cause trouble in our town." Mr. Henderson replied, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the town square. David made a decision that would change his life forever. He couldn't stand by and watch Amara suffer any longer. He didn't care what the consequences might be. The crowd had thinned out as dinner time approached. Only a few guards remained, and they were getting tired after a long day of standing watch. David waited until their attention was distracted. Then he made his move. He sprinted across the square toward the pole where Amara hung. The guards shouted and gave chase, but David had always been fast. He reached Amara and began untying the ropes with shaking hands. "David, no?" Amara whispered weakly. "They'll only make it worse. I don't care." David replied, working frantically at the knots. "I'm not leaving you here another minute." The guards reached them just as David freed Amara from the pole. She collapsed into his arms, barely conscious from exhaustion and cold. David lifted her up and began running toward her grandmother's house, with angry shouts echoing behind them. "You'll pay for this, Miller," someone yelled. "This isn't over." David didn't look back. He carried Amara through the empty streets as darkness fell over Millbrook. Behind them, he could hear cars starting up and voices organizing. The community that had punished Amara for loving him was now preparing to punish him for saving her. As he kicked open the door to her grandmother's house, David realized that their nightmare was far from over. In fact, by defying the town's judgment, he had probably made everything much worse. But as he looked down at Amara's pale face and felt her breathing against his chest, he knew he had made the only choice he could live with. Some things were more important than community approval. Some things were worth fighting for, no matter what the cost. David carried Amara into her grandmother's house. Just as the first angry voices reached the front yard, her grandmother rushed to help, her face pale with worry and fear. Together, they laid Amara on the couch and wrapped her in every blanket they could find. She was barely conscious, her skin cold and her breathing shallow. "We need to get her warm," her grandmother said, hurrying to the kitchen to boil water for tea. "And we need to think about what comes next. They won't just let this go." David knelt beside Amara, holding her hand and watching her slowly come back to herself. Her eyes fluttered open and she tried to sit up, but he gently pressed her back down. "Rest," he said softly. "You're safe now." "David," she whispered, her voice hoarse from hours in the cold. "You shouldn't have done that. Now they'll come after you too." Before he could answer, they heard car doors slamming outside. Through the window, David could see headlights in the driveway and shadows moving across the yard. The angry voices. "We're getting closer. Open this door right now," someone shouted from the porch. David recognized Mr. Henderson's voice. "We know you're in there, Miller." Amara's grandmother returned from the kitchen with shaking hands. "There's a back door," she whispered. "You could slip out through the garden." David looked at Amara, lying on the couch, still weak and trembling. The thought of leaving her to face these angry men alone made his stomach turn. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "David Miller." The voice outside was getting angrier. "You have 30 seconds to come out here and face what you've done." David stood up and walked to the front door. He could hear Amara calling his name behind him, but he didn't turn around. With a deep breath, he opened the door and stepped onto the porch. At least 20 men stood in the yard, some holding flashlights, others carrying tools from their farms and workshops. David had grown up with most of these men. He had played with their children and helped them at the hardware store. Now they looked at him like he was a stranger. "You had no right to interfere, Mr. Henderson said. Stepping forward, the community made a decision about that girl's punishment. You violated that decision. The community doesn't have the right to torture people, David replied, trying to keep his voice steady. What you did today was wrong, and you all know it. Tom Brady pushed through the crowd, his face red with anger. Wrong? You want to know what's wrong? It's wrong when someone thinks they're better than everyone else. It's wrong when they ignore the rules that keep this town peaceful. Peaceful? David couldn't believe what he was hearing. You tied an innocent woman to a pole in the cold for 8 hours. How's that peaceful? The men in the crowd began shouting over each other, their voices mixing into an angry wall of sound. Some demanded that David apologize. Others wanted him to leave town immediately. A few suggested that he should face the same punishment they had given Amara. Through all the noise, David heard a different voice. It was his own father, pushing through the crowd with tears in his eyes. Son, his father said quietly, please, don't make this worse than it already is. Come home with me. We can work this out. David looked at his father and saw genuine pain in his face. For a moment, he wavered. His whole life was in this town. His family, his job, his future. All he had to do was apologize and promise to stay away from Amara. Things could go back to normal. But then he heard Amara's voice from inside the house. Weak but determined, David, don't let them bully you. We haven't done anything wrong. That was when David made the most important decision of his life. He looked at the crowd of angry faces and made his choice. I'm not apologizing for loving someone, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I'm not apologizing for treating another human being with kindness and respect. And I'm certainly not apologizing for stopping you from torturing her. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. Several men stepped toward the porch. But David's father held up his hand to stop them. You're choosing her over your own family? His father asked, his voice breaking. Over your own community. I'm choosing what's right over what's easy, David replied. I thought you raised me to know the difference. His father's face crumpled with disappointment and grief. Without another word, he turned and walked back to his truck. Several other men followed him, shaking their heads and muttering under their breath. But Mr. Henderson and about half the crowd remained. This isn't over, he told David coldly. If you won't leave voluntarily, we'll find other ways to solve this problem. After the men finally left, David went back inside to find Amara sitting up on the couch, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Her grandmother was pacing by the window, watching the last of the headlights disappear down the street. They'll be back, her grandmother said quietly. And next time, they might not just be carrying flashlights. David sat down beside Amara and took her hand. Maybe your grandmother is right. Maybe we should leave town. Amara squeezed his hand weakly. Is that what you want to do? Run away and let them think they won? David thought about it for a long moment. Running away would be the smart thing to do. It would be the safe thing to do. But it would also mean letting the bullies and the bigots control their lives forever. No, he said finally, I don't want to run, but I want you to be safe more than anything. Then we need a plan, Amara said, her strength slowly returning. We can't just wait here for them to decide what to do with us. Her grandmother stopped, pacing and looked at them both. I might know someone who can help, she said hesitantly. There's a lawyer in the county seat who handles cases like this. Civil rights cases. David felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. You think we have a legal case against them? What they did today was illegal. Her grandmother replied, it was kidnapping and assault, no matter what they call it. The question is whether we're brave enough to fight back. David looked at Amara, who was nodding slowly despite her exhaustion. I'm tired of being scared, she said. I'm tired of letting other people decide whether our love is acceptable or not. Then we fight. David said, feeling determination replace the fear in his chest. We make them face the consequences of what they did. As they began planning their next moves, David realized that everything had changed. The scared young man who had watched helplessly as the woman he loved was punished was gone. In his place was someone stronger, someone willing to stand up for what was right no matter what it cost. Him, outside, The town of Millbrook slept uneasily, unaware that the quiet couple they had tried to break was about to fight back in ways they never expected. The battle for love and justice was just beginning, and David had no intention of losing. The next morning would bring new challenges and new choices, but for tonight, he was exactly where he belonged, beside the woman he loved. Planning their fight for a future together, he had refused to leave her on that pole, and he would never leave her side again. The morning after the confrontation, David woke up on Amara's grandmother's couch with sunlight streaming through the windows. For a brief moment, he forgot where he was and why he was there. Then the memories came flooding back. The pole, the angry crowd, the choice he had made to fight instead of run. Amara was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her grandmother and a man David didn't recognize. He was wearing a suit and had a briefcase open beside him, filled with papers and legal documents. "David," Amara said as he joined them, "this is Mr. Roberts. He's the lawyer my grandmother told us about." Mr. Roberts stood up and shook David's hand firmly. "I've been hearing about what happened in your town yesterday. What they did to Miss Amara was completely illegal, and I want to help you fight it." David sat down, still trying to wake up fully. "What exactly can we do? It's our word against the whole town's." "Actually, it's not," Mr. Roberts replied with a slight smile. "It turns out Mrs. Patterson wasn't the only one with a camera yesterday. Several people took pictures of what was happening in the town square. Some out of curiosity, others because they were uncomfortable with what they were seeing." He pulled out a stack of photographs and spread them across the table. David's stomach lurched as he saw image after image of Amara tied to the pole, surrounded by the crowd of townspeople. The pictures made the cruelty of what had happened impossible to deny. These photos have already been shared with the state police and the local newspaper. Mr. Roberts continued, "By this afternoon, this story will be front-page news across the entire county." Amara looked at the photos with a mixture of pain and determination. "Good," she said quietly. "Let everyone see what hate looks like over the next few days." Everything changed in Millbrook. The story of what had happened to Amara spread far beyond the county newspaper, television. Reporters arrived in town, interviewing anyone who would talk to them. Civil rights organizations offered their support. The state attorney general announced an investigation into possible criminal charges. David and Amara found themselves at the center of a media storm they had never expected. Reporters camped outside the grandmother's house, wanting to hear their story. Some were sympathetic, others seemed more interested in sensational headlines than the truth, but the attention also brought unexpected support. Letters began arriving from all over the country, from people who had faced similar struggles and wanted to encourage them to keep fighting. A legal defense fund was set up to help with their court costs. Most surprisingly, several people from Millbrook itself began speaking out against what had happened. Mrs. Coleman, who ran the town's small library, was the first to publicly apologize. She came to the grandmother's house 3 days after the incident, with tears in her eyes and a basket of homemade cookies. "I was there that day," she told Amara. "I watched what they did to you, and I said nothing. I was a coward, and I'm ashamed of myself. You're here now," Amara replied gently. "That's what matters." Mrs. Coleman wasn't the only one. Dr. Phillips, who had been the town doctor for 20 years, published a letter in the newspaper condemning the public punishment as barbaric and un-American. The pastor of the Methodist Church gave a sermon about love and forgiveness that many people interpreted as support for David and Amara. But the town remained deeply divided. Many families still supported what had been done, arguing that David and Amara had brought the trouble on themselves by refusing to respect community standards. Anonymous threats continued to arrive in the mail. Someone spray-painted nasty words on the grandmother's fence. The legal case moved forward slowly but steadily. Mr. Roberts filed both criminal complaints and a civil lawsuit against the men who had organized Amara's punishment. The evidence was overwhelming, not just the photographs, but witness statements from people who had been uncomfortable with what they saw. Mr. Henderson, Tom Brady, and Joe Williams were arrested and charged with kidnapping, assault, and violation of civil rights. The arrest sent shockwaves through Millbrook's power structure. These were men who had controlled the town for decades, and suddenly they were facing serious prison time. The trial became a media sensation. Reporters filled the courthouse every day, broadcasting the proceedings to a national audience. David and Amara testified about their relationship and the events leading up to that terrible day in November. Their simple, honest testimony moved many people to tears. The defense lawyers tried to argue that their clients were just protecting community values and that no real harm had been intended, but the photographs spoke louder than any words. The jury saw a young woman tied to a pole in the freezing cold for 8 hours, and they understood exactly what kind of community values were being protected. It took the jury less than 3 hours to find all 3 men guilty on all charges. Mr. Henderson was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Tom Brady and Joe Williams each received 18 months. The civil lawsuit resulted in a substantial financial settlement that would help David and Amara start their new life together. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the slow but steady change that began happening in Millbrook itself. The national attention had embarrassed many townspeople who had never really thought about how their traditions looked to the outside world. Young people, especially, began questioning why their community had been so resistant to change. 6 months after the trial, David and Amara were married in a small ceremony at the Methodist Church. Pastor Williams, who had supported them throughout their ordeal, performed the service. About 50 people attended, a mix of family members who had come around, new friends they had made during their legal battle, and longtime Millbrook residents who wanted to show their support. David's father was there, having spent months rebuilding his relationship with his son. I was wrong, he had told David a few weeks earlier. I let fear make me into someone I didn't recognize. I'm proud of you for being braver than I was. Even Mrs. Patterson attended the wedding, though she sat in the back and left quickly afterward. She never apologized directly, but her presence felt like a small acknowledgement that times were changing. As David and Amara exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever challenges might come. David thought about how far they had traveled from that first day in the hardware store. Their love had been tested in ways they never could have imagined, but it had emerged stronger than ever. After the wedding, they moved to a larger town about an hour away, where David opened his own hardware store and Amara found work as an art teacher. They returned to Millbrook regularly to visit her grandmother and to see the slow but steady progress the town was making. Years later, David would often think about the day he had to choose between the easy path and the right path. He never regretted his decision to cut Amara down from that pole and fight for their love. The battle had been difficult and painful, but it had taught him something important about courage and justice. Love had indeed won over hate, but not easily and not without cost. It had required standing up to bullies, facing down an angry mob, and refusing to be intimidated by people who wanted to control other people's lives. Most importantly, it had required believing that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how difficult the fight might be. Their story became part of Millbrook's history, not the shameful part that people wanted to forget, but the hopeful part that showed how communities could change and grow. And every time David saw a young couple facing prejudice or discrimination, he would tell them what he had learned: love is always worth fighting for. But sometimes you have to fight harder than you ever imagined you could. Chat controls Sonnet 4.